welcome to 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. I'm your host, Rachel Vogel, and joining me on tonight's episode is Bill Gerdts, the head of social East Coast at WMA. Bill is an experienced veteran of marketing music across social platforms since the days of MySpace and Vine. He's worked at every major label group, starting at Sony Music's Columbia Records, where he worked digital marketing for artists like Daft Punk and Jack White. In 2018, he joined the senior digital team at UMG's Republic Records, where he was fortunate to work award-winning campaigns for Pearl Jam and Glass Animals, as well as the then rising star Noah Kahan. In 2021, he joined Warner Music's social publishing division, leading campaigns and activations for artists ranging from Portugal The Man to Kevin Gates. He recently joined WMA as head of social, where he oversees the next generation of digital storytellers. So, Bill, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you on. Before we get started, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day here in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, New York City, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, well, let's dive right into question one. Imagine for a second you're sitting down with your 25-year-old self. What one piece of advice would you give him on a personal note? And what one piece of advice would you give him from a business perspective?
Okay, I would say on a personal note, I would say to trust your instincts more. You're surrounded by lots of smart and experienced people, but you yourself have good instincts as to what makes a great story for an artist and what's going to connect with their audience too. So I would encourage you, 25-year-old Bill, to speak up more and tell the truth around something you're seeing. If you don't think something's going to connect with an audience, say so. It's ultimately more damaging for a campaign if an idea that you think about is clearly bad and still ends up going through. I mean, at the time, I was just starting out at Columbia, first as an intern and then as an assistant, and that was the era when 1D was hitting peak mania
Oh my
online.
gosh.
Yeah, and as with any huge breakthrough for an artist, this whole host of similar boy bands were getting signed and developed at the time, and we were tasked as the digital team with coming up with, for example, memes based on their existing videos and photos. And I just remember what clunkers some of those memes were, and how artificial they felt and how they were kind of shoehorned into this. At the time it was Rage Comics and memes. I mean, things are way, way different now. But I remember, sending the management team, three memes, for example, and two of them made me laugh, and one of them was one that I thought that they would approve. They hated that one. They loved the one that made me laugh. So again, yeah, just going back on a personal note, yeah, trust your instincts. Professionally, and yeah, from a business perspective, really, I would say to pay more attention to where the prosperity in your current era is. There always will be terrible headlines, but there will also always be pockets of the industry that are thriving. Look at what's going on out there and where you can tap in. At the
Mhm.
time, I was just starting out once again at Columbia, right? And that was the era when, as far as the economy was concerned, interest rates were low, right? And money was cheap and VC funding was everywhere. And we had some new startup founder walk into the Sony hallways with a wacky prototype of an app every week. And so I hadn't realized at the time how uncommon that necessarily was and how it was all too accessible for someone with a good idea and enough drive to tackle. So look for the prosperity because there always will be some out there, and see how you might want to align with that and build your career against that.
Yeah, really great advice. Before we jump into the next question, I guess kind of ties into what you just said. Your entire career has focused around working with social platforms. So I'd be curious to know, what do you see next up in terms of that kind of next generation of social platforms? And what do you think that they need to consist of to kind of beat out the competition?
I'd say we're seeing a mirroring of the fragmenting that has been taking place for a few decades now, in the supposed, let's say, there's a monoculture of media, right? There used to be way, way back in the day before either of us were born, three TV stations, right? And they splintered into all sorts of different networks. I think we're seeing that happen with social media now, where there used to be, for example, a Twitter-esque go to town square where you can sound off on an opinion and everyone would participate in a very public arena. Now that platform has kind of split into a trifecta of Blue Sky, Threads, and now what's known as X, with different communities forming on these different platforms. And so we're seeing that increased fragmentation. So to maybe reframe your question a bit, and it's a lot of the thinking that I've had throughout this career and I've had to unlearn. By the way, that's another thing you have to always do is just keep unlearning. Keep learning and keep unlearning. Um, but it's not going to be which app will win. It will be which community will exist within and between and among all of these apps. We're looking for dandelions in concrete. We're looking for pockets of authenticity. A very key ray of hope that I have is that people's, BS meters are very, very refined, and we can almost spot instantly when something is even written by a bot. So authenticity is going to be the social currency, the real human beings. Look for the real human beings, find those communities, and don't, I'd say, discriminate on whichever social app is out there. Be curious about all of them and see past the apps and look for the communities, I'd say.
Yeah, I think one of the really cool things that have always been around, but I think really reemerged this year was like the fan accounts. They even did it for like the Kamala campaign. And so that's a great place. I think that has kind of built community on all those different accounts over the year.
Very true, very true. Fan accounts will succeed the most when they're driven organically by what we're seeing. We're seeing a rise in the professional fan, right? The
Yeah.
ones who are getting paid to be fans. So keep an eye on that as well.
All right, next question. Every industry has its dirty little secrets, and we all know that's no different in the music industry. Sometimes people think that's a bad thing, but that's not always the case. Sometimes they can be quite good. So, what's one secret you would like to share with our listeners about the industry?
Believe it or not, the music industry has a wide range of calm and chaos. It's not all chaotic. Though we all sometimes feel that way. Your appetite for risk and reward kind of boils down to how closely you want to work with the artist. So an analogy I often like to use is to think of the music industry as a swirling hurricane. At the center is the artist, with managers in the closest inner ring, and it's chaotic as hell near the center. You also have, let's say, A&R talent scouts and what have you. High risk, high reward. Then as you pull out, you have the progressively less risky rings of middle management. You're a marketer at a label, you're a booker at an agency. It's good work, but it's a grind. Finally, you have the corporate departments that every corporation needs: finance, HR, legal. Each are vital, but will also not get you many free concert tickets. So it's your choice as to where on this spectrum of risk reward you want to thrive in. And as I mentioned, A&R is pretty close to this manager ring too.
I think that's a great outer look on the whole thing. Can you share a little bit about what it's been like to go from working on more of the label side to the agency side, and where do you fall in that ring?
Yeah, yeah, no, it's in this whichever model you want to use, right? We mentioned it being a hurricane. You can also use a galaxy, right? Everything is kind of swirling and you have all sorts of different stars and planets and locations of people working within this place. And when you're at a label, let's say, there's an inbox that the good part is that it naturally gets filled. The bad part is that it naturally gets filled. And so it's on you as an opportunity aggregator, really. When you're at a label, you're just aggregating a lot of opportunities and then sifting them out and presenting the best ones, driving your own ideas to the artist. But it can encourage people to be more passive than proactive. Every couple of years there's a shakeup, but for the most part, that's what it's been like at a label, right? Sort of just by virtue of being in the building, you're going to run into these artists. At an agency, you have to look for those opportunities. You have to eat what you kill. You have to be the change agent for your own inbox and reach out to folks to increase the work with your existing clients and find work with new clients. And so as that kind of new challenge in my career, I've really, really enjoyed it. It has allowed me to speak with more people than I ever have in a way. And it gets you a better sense of where this hurricane slash galaxy kind of exists and all of the players in it. The music industry is such a diverse array of different types, from indie labels to managers to syndicates to Harry Fox agencies, right? You know, collecting mechanicals to the talent bookers to the folks working on tours and Live Nation and everything. So that has been such a beautiful revelation that I've had being in this agency now.
Yeah, I was gonna say you probably get to put your hands into a lot of different pots.
Oh yeah. And not necessarily within music too. There are
Mhm.
so many music adjacent things, lifestyle and brands that they all kind of feed into one another.
Really cool. All
Hmm.
right, last question. Throughout your career, I'm sure you've been asked plenty of questions, whether it was for an industry conference, the media, or even a promotion. But throughout all of those interviews and all of those questions, there has to be one that you've never been asked but would have liked to. So, what is that question and what would be your answer?
This is going to be maybe to some a silly thing, but I think it ties back to storytelling overall for an artist and then the story that they stand to tell within an album. So I love thinking about my theory of the perfect album, right? So it's 10 tracks. I think the perfect album is 10 tracks where you kick off with a banger, you keep the momentum going, and then by the time side one wraps, because yes, the proper album is on vinyl, uh, you have the crown jewel of the album, and it's usually track four or track five. And that closes out side A. And then when you go on to side B, it's almost like a mini album unto itself because you have to keep that momentum going and then finish with an even bigger banger at the very end. And that last track is the cornerstone that kind of redefines what the album is all about. It kind of cements it as a body of work. It tells a story, hopefully, and it kind of reminds listeners as to what this entire album was about in the first place. It doesn't necessarily need to be a concept album, but as far as a cohesive story, I very much believe in the power of albums themselves, and we need to kind of fight for their continued relevance, even in the streaming age.
That's a really good take on it. It's interesting that you say that because I feel like, especially in the last year, so many artists have come out with albums that are like 20 songs plus long.
Uh-huh. Yep. They're
Interesting.
casting a wide net. And that's the Spotification of it all too. You know, and not to say that I know that there's a lot of back and forth about that, but look, the medium has always given a creative limitation to music. You know, radio is the reason that songs were 2 to 3 minutes in the first place. So, you know, it's all in service towards selling music, sure, but in order to sell music, sometimes you have to tell a great story.
It's about time we close out tonight's episode, but Bill, thanks again for joining me. It's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Of course, likewise. Thank you for having me.
To everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Stay tuned for next week of 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. See you next time.